Good morning. I'm Terry Kramer, Faculty Director of the Easton Technology Management Center here at UCLA Anderson. And I'd like to welcome you to day 2 of Innovate 2021, Easton Center's flagship conference on all things tech. Now, as you know, technology has fundamentally changed all of our lives, our work, opportunities for new ventures and established enterprises, challenges for everyone, and more broadly, opportunities and challenges for society itself. Technology is affecting almost every sector today, including transportation, healthcare, financial services, and in retail. As a reminder on this conference, we had 3 goals when we organized it. The first one is to make sure that all of us get the latest understanding about enabling technologies, and whether that be artificial intelligence, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, high-speed 5th-generation mobile networks, where do those technologies stand and their capabilities? Second goal of the conference is to understand the product service innovation that comes from these enabling technologies. And we're going to use several sectors to understand those opportunities and innovation during this morning. So this would be in healthcare, in e-commerce, in transportation, and in robotics. And then our third goal for the conference is to highlight the horizontal leadership thread that weaves everything together. And that includes understanding what it takes for consumers to adopt, where innovation will occur, what does it take for companies and new ventures to compete, how to deal with public stakeholders, etc. I hope after you get through the whole conference, you have a much better appreciation about technology and how our speakers think about the role of technology in a variety of industries. As you'll see on the agenda, we're going to start this morning with a fireside discussion with Nan Bowden, COO of the Everyday Robot Project within the X division at Alphabet, the parent company of Google. We'll then have panel discussions on healthcare and on e-commerce. We're then going to be doing a bit of our own innovation, and we're going to be having structured networking breakout sessions via Zoom that will bring together at the very end of the conference groups of students, alumni, UCLA affiliates, and the public at large as part of our mission to create a sense of community and to serve the community itself. We encourage you to join the networking sessions to reflect on what you've heard, dive deeper on specific issues, and to meet one another. Now let me shift to our keynote address and advances in automation, key applications, the increasingly critical role of artificial intelligence, and a bit of context about this important topic. Now, COVID-19 has accelerated technological advances and adoption, particularly in areas of automation of many routine tasks, in areas of manufacturing, distribution, and in contactless checkout in retail environments. Automation and AI will continue to change the world and the way we live and work. Robots have the potential to improve our everyday lives by automating repetitive tasks and sometimes dangerous tasks. They can enable workers to focus on high-value tasks that often require interpersonal interactions and focus more on creative, strategic, and entrepreneurial endeavors. At a consumer level, automation can often improve the quality of our goods and services, lower costs, and improve availability. Now, with all those great benefits, there are also many important externalities and challenges. MIT's Professor Daron Acemoglu recently conducted research that finds that robots play a notable role in the future of work, with an average of 1 robot added in manufacturing replacing 3.3 workers nationally and changing the nature of work in many environments. In many cases, new jobs will require governments and businesses to collaborate on reskilling and upskilling initiatives to help employees retrain and prepare for new future jobs. All of this brings us to the fascinating role of leadership and innovation. What does impactful innovation look like in this context, specifically in the robotics area? How do leaders think about promising areas of innovation? How do they think about maturity of technology? How do they think about building an organization with the right assets, skills, culture to succeed? How do they partner with public officials, etc.? Now, we are very fortunate to have this morning Nan Bowden, Chief Operating Officer at the Everyday Robot Project within the X division of Alphabet, the parent company of Google. Nan joined Google in 2013 via an acquisition that formed Google's data center division, where she handled a variety of strategic initiatives as well as mergers and acquisitions. At Google, she spent her career working at the strategic intersection of technology and business. She helped found and scale Google Cloud's Google Technology Partners team, which developed hundreds of technology partnerships, including Google's foundational partnerships with SAP, Cisco, and Salesforce. Prior to Google, she had a 19-year career at Maricom, which is a Caltech spinoff that was a pioneer in high-performance computer networking. She started as a software engineer and later moved into business roles, including EVP and CFO, CEO, and member of Maricom's board of directors. She earned her PhD and master's degrees in computer science from Caltech. Her PhD research, runtime systems for fine-grained multi-computers, led her directly into her work at Maricom, where she wrote the operating system that controls the company's first products. She received her bachelor's in applied mathematics from the University of Alabama, and she is a proud UCLA Anderson alum. Now, in terms of the format, I'll ask Nan a series of questions. We'll get a better opportunity to understand her points of view and insights, and then we'll use Slido for a moderated Q&A. For those of you that haven't used Slido, just go to slido.com, SLIDO.com, and enter in the event code Innovate1, the number 1. So Innovate1. So Nan, let me just first say a huge welcome. Wonderful to have you here.
Great. Thank you, Terry. I've been very much looking forward to this. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Nan, with almost everybody I interview that has an impressive background like yours, I ask them to start with their leadership journey. I mean, you had a bunch of interesting roles starting out. You know, you were at Maricom and Google Cloud and now the robotics effort. Tell us about your leadership journey.
Yeah, well, it's been a tremendous opportunity, and I think I'm very grateful for all of that I've been able to experience, and a lot of that facilitated by what I learned at UCLA. But I think overall, coming from a highly technical background and expanding into more business and as you mentioned on the seam of technology and business, that's really opened up the impact of the leadership opportunities that I've had. The ability to create very high performing teams that can really achieve so much more than what the individuals can achieve, but to do that not just in technology, but also in areas that have that synergy with the business value and also what you can bring to the world for impact. So I really appreciate so much of those leadership opportunities because each one has taught me something different. You learn more from your mistakes than you do your successes, but each one of them has helped position me, I think, for the impact that I can have as it comes later, and in particular, during moments when leadership really matters. Obviously COVID is one great example, unfortunately current, of when leadership really matters. And I think a lot of the things that I've done in my career have just led forward to the next leadership opportunity. And I'm just very grateful for all of that journey.
Wow, great philosophies there. Nancy, tell us about the Everyday Robot Project. What is it? What's the ambition there? How's it progressing? All of those things.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a really exciting project. And I'm very fortunate to be part of X, which is the Moonshot division inside of Alphabet, places where Waymo and Verily and those other businesses have been spun out of. It's a place where it's a factory of innovation. And so you have a lot of very, very amazing people, and the ambition is so large. That's why we call it a moonshot. The Everyday Robots Moonshot is to bring robots into our everyday lives in ways that help everyday people. Our mission is to help everyday people in their everyday lives everywhere, and in that sense, from a robotics sense, if you have a robotics background, you hear a mission like that and you go, yeah, no, that cannot be done, because it hasn't been able to be done. Robots have been around, probably a century or so, and a lot of science fiction, but now also very prevalent in businesses, but in the industrial sense. You have these very large robots that are anchored to the floor. They're sometimes kept in cages to make sure they don't hurt anything. I mean, they're very powerful. They're difficult to program. They're very dependent on the structure of their environment and the structure of what you're asking them to do, like if it's manufacturing a car on an automotive line. So we think of those kind of industrial robots, as successful as they are, but like the mainframes of computing of long ago. So the journey from mainframes and computing to the smartphone in your pocket is what we see happening with robotics over the next few, hopefully years, if not decades of this trajectory. So what we want to see is that can we make robots that are live and work amongst us, next to us, helping us in our everyday with a series of tasks that really are beneficial to the humans, but in a way that's in our messy and unstructured world. It's extremely challenging for robots to exist around us because this world is so unstructured. What seems simple to us is just incredibly complicated for robots, and to have them be able to help us really requires not programming, not scripting, because the world is too messy for that, but instead learning. And so there's a learning robots project where we're teaching the robots. The robots learn from humans, they learn from each other, they learn from experience, both real world experience and also a tremendous amount of simulation. And so in that sense, we have the Robotics Moonshot is to bring robotics into the physical world, much of the benefits like you've seen computers bring to the digital world.
Yeah, and Nan, it's so fascinating to think from an organizational leadership standpoint, how do you get people to think about going for moonshots? I mean, is this kind of white space thing broadly and then try and get some technical expertise to bring it to reality, or what?
It's I think there's more inspiration in people than is often released, right? I think more people would like to be working on things that are that impactful and that aspirational than get the opportunity to. And so one of the reasons that X is as successful as it is a factory of innovation. It's trying to have a process by which we learn how to bring like-minded people together with that kind of aspirational, how can we change the world? What is the really big problem? What's different now? Why wasn't this problem, it's a big problem, but why wasn't it solved 10 years ago or 20 years ago? Usually it takes a confluence of technology. So as much as you've seen, with AI, I think artificial intelligence now is, of course, very powerful in our daily lives. But, depending on how you're counting, it's been 3 or 4 cycles of, oh, wait, we've got it. Oh, wait, no, we don't. That's all hype, over and over and over again. And I think that, we have to be aspirational that, no, this is the time, or maybe it's the time. And can we bring together these really challenging technical problems to solve, and then when we solve them, can we unlock the societal or business value?
Yep. And tell us about some of the specific applications of robotics. What's your favorite? What do you think we'll see near term, longer term, et cetera?
Well, and I think there's just a lot of things that we see that humans have been doing that if you stop and think, you're like, well, is that really what we want human beings to do? But yet robots haven't yet been able to do. So one of the applications we've been public about, which was really more of it's a very complex set of experiments around data learning, but really around, can you sort trash? Can a robot learn to sort trash into recyclables and compostables? And how does that actually work with respect to how much can we reduce the contamination? What is the business value? And that kind of application is still very early in whether or not there's, what kind of business value there is, but it's very predictive in terms of, what can we teach a robot to learn? And then how does the robot learn from its own experience and from simulation? So you see things like being able to help humans with health and safety in the workplace. There's a lot of robotics advances happening right now due to COVID, and mostly because, I think robotics in general, there's a notional sense of, hey, they can help. But when COVID hit, it definitely turned into let's send the robots in instead of the people, because it definitely, what was dangerous has become a very different world as it was a year ago. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of applications, I think, just if you can really get the robots to be able to learn, to be safe, and to be helpful around us, because once you really start applying robotics to the everyday world, you just see how challenging it is because it's not really something that you can script.
And so what would be some of the successor products? You mentioned sorting trash, and obviously there's some COVID. What would be the other things that might come here?
Yeah, well, I can't get into too many specifics at this stage, but I can tell you what's going on in the industry with respect to seeing how these applications are. You see a lot of disinfecting robots right now going into hospitals and going into airports. Being able to do things that really understand what the environment is around, from a physical plant perspective, and being able to do something about it. In that sense, robots really do merge the knowledge world to the physical world in a way that is not something that you can just tell them, hey, go do this, because the world is, like you said, too messy. Even something as straightforward as sorting trash, it's shockingly complex, and it's also something that, you see the robots get better and better and better at. And one of the beautiful things about it is once one robot has figured out how to move one piece of trash to get underneath it to get to something else, which, occlusion and that kind of things which human beings learn as toddlers, is very challenging for computers. And to be able to see that, and for robots, and be able to see them be able to figure that out, and then the rest of the robot fleet understands how to move things and what strategies to try. And much like Google's kind of watershed moment with AlphaGo a few years ago, when we had the AI that was able to master the game of Go, you start to see things that the computers learn and the robots learn on their own, which is really exciting, I think. And it's just a beginning of a glimpse of the future where that kind of learning and that kind of experience really builds on itself, and you get to see the robots really be helpful in a way that's very natural to humans, but it's very, very challenging for computers and robots.
Yeah, and in Nan, the development of these robots, is it similar to autonomous vehicles that you need lots of data points to make it work? Because otherwise you have some problems on your hands.
Yeah, there's a lot of analogies. In fact, we think about that a lot, given our friends at Waymo are very much sister companies. We think about the similarities, but in some ways it's even harder in terms of creating a new category. So like in the sense of autonomous vehicles, you have, we all know what a car is. We all know what we're doing with autonomous vehicles is trying to not have drivers, and so there's kind of we still have the same roads. We still have the same, traffic signals. You still have the same world. In everyday robots, you kind of building the roads, you're building the street signs, you're building all of these things at once because the category has never really existed before. And that creates, now putting on my UCLA informed business hat, that creates a whole lot of exciting things when you're creating, or at least pioneering in a new category. It's a crazy open space for innovation, which is really exciting, but it's also very challenging. I mean, how do you compare to something that doesn't really exist yet? You can't ask a customer, would you like to have something that does X, when they can't even really understand what you're talking about, or what might be possible if you could give them X. And so there's so much more of a partnership with your customer and with your like-minded people trying to solve problems, trying to build that map of what that future world could look like. And always trying to keep in mind that you want to build that map and you also want to reap the business value of it. I think one of the things I learned the hard way in my original startup was, we built a tremendous technology. It changed the world of supercomputing, but the business was always kind of, it's okay, it's great. It was good, it was profitable, but it wasn't what it could have been. It wasn't what it should have been. And in that sense, making sure that as the COO of this project, one of the things I spend a lot of time on is setting the team and the organization up for being able to reap the benefit of that building of the map and where are we going, and really being a leader, not just somebody who builds a map for others to take advantage of.
Yeah. So basically your mental map and deciding what to advance and where and all that is a sense of what consumers might need, a sense of where the technology exists, these infrastructure enablers, et cetera. Is that kind of how you put it all together?
I think that's largely it. I think it's, there's a lot of analogies in, like, if I'm out trying to, find a new continent, or I know it's kind of over that way, but yet you need the ship, you need a crew, you need to know where you're kind of going, you need to be able to adjust based on what you learn along the way. You need to understand what are the real inhibitors to being successful. There's a lot of analogies at X of, whether if you're going to build a monkey who can be up on a pedestal and do amazing things, do you start with the monkey, the really complex part, or do you start with a pedestal? Well, you want to start with the hard things because they may not be possible yet. I think that's one of the things that we learned in AI over the last couple of decades, is that we had very small systems that would work well, but we didn't have all the pieces we needed to really make AI be what it is today. It really took, neural network model innovation. It took these giant data centers. It took these unbelievably large data sets before we could really kind of bring it to where it's useful. And I think you're going to see the same sort of things with robotics, and understanding that what has to be true and how can we make it true is a large part of the innovation work.
And if you were to guess or estimate here where the adoption will happen in one environment, would it be a kind of home of the future where you have the infrastructure? It might be in a more urban area where labor costs are high. It might be a target customer that's younger. Is that how you kind of think about all this?
Well, I think you try to, like much of product market fit, right? Where a market doesn't exist yet, and neither the product nor the market exist yet. You try to shape, where does this make a difference? What can we do now? Where does it make a difference? And which problems are frankly just too hard yet? And so you mentioned being in the home. Robots in the home, at least in a general purpose sense, is extremely challenging. You talk about messy environments. The home is really complicated, just in terms of, from a human being perspective, if you have toys on the floor of your living room, you have toys on the floor of your living room, what's the big deal? To a robot, it's like, whoa, different room, hold on, so you have a lot of, it's really challenging the home environment. So there are simpler environments, maybe more regular things in like commercial buildings that you can work on, kind of what can I do in a commercial building well before you would ever be able to tackle the home, partly just because of the space and the regularity of it that you would expect to see. So, I think you look for places where you create value, and you mentioned, workers. I think that's one of the things that we spend a lot of time and attention on, is just what is the impact on the labor workforce and what do we want it to be? And it definitely, what we're aiming for is this symbiotic, this collaborative work, humans and robots together, because we really think that's where the true value is going to be for many, many industries. And it's also where robotics and humans working together can solve problems that neither can solve alone. And that's what I think a lot of people find really exciting about this kind of work.
Let me dive deeper on that topic, because I've alluded to some of these statistics here. PwC's done a study that said that robotics will create huge economic gain. $15.7 trillion will be added to the global economy. But then there was a separate study by PwC that said 30% of jobs and 44% of workers are at risk in their work due to automation. What's your take on the debits and credits here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very complex space, right? It's also one where I think we're all trying to find our way to the right place. And I think that becomes a principles and a values kind of discussion as much as it becomes a technical one. And we think about this literally every day, if not every hour, because there always is the possibility with automation that you're just replacing workers, that you're just, this worker is now gone and now or these 3 workers are now gone and now I have 1 robot. That is not our intent. In fact, if that were our intent, I'm pretty sure about 3/4 of our team wouldn't be working on this project. That's not why we're here. In fact, that mission driven is more for what is that symbiotic relationship of humans and robots, and can we make that be what an aspirational world that we all want to live in, we want our children to live in. So for example, if we've talked about trash sorting, there are places in the world where human beings, often children unfortunately, are sorting trash. They're moving this compostable, this recyclable there, because that's the economic value. Is that really something we want humans doing? I don't think so. Now, if you think about, there's so many examples in the industrial revolution and in the information age of disruption from technology. One of the ones that I find instructive is the replacement of human switchboard operators when AT&T rolled out their digital switching infrastructure in, I think, 1950s. There's some tremendous videos on YouTube about that if you're ever interested in that. And I think if you look at the job that thousands, and typically women, had in the 40s and 50s doing the manual switching of plug here to plug there. They sat on a stool, had 18 inches, I think, of space around them, and they sat next to shoulder to shoulder to shoulder, and they basically would just plug in these cables between this house and that house, and they would get to know those blocks of people and their lives, and there was this engagement. And when that was automated, all of those people lost their jobs. And it was very disruptive for them. And so we never want to lose sight of that in terms of the march of technology, but we also want to think about, is that really the best use of human? Would we go back to that? Do we want people, sitting on stools and not able to even go to the restroom without permission, because we didn't automate? Instead, can we think of it more like, if a person is digging holes for a living with a shovel, and if we give them a backhoe, I mean, isn't that, can't they do better holes, deeper, and also get the benefit of their labor and their humanness, right? And I think that's something we always have to be sensitive to, because it's not every worker that can move to that higher tech job. So part of what we spend a lot of time thinking on is, how do we help on that journey? How do we take that person who is doing a job that a computer or a robot can now do, and have them be more empowered, like that person digging holes with a backhoe is now more empowered? Yeah. We spend a lot of time with third parties, future of work folks. It's a really interesting problem. When I think if we solve it well, it's better for humanity, and that's really what our aspiration is.
Yeah. And do you sense, I know this is getting into very macro theory here, but when you look at all these areas of innovation, right? So robotics and autonomous vehicles, virtual assistants for call centers, et cetera, can we kind of satisfy ourselves that there's an equal number of new jobs created? Or the reality is these are productivity enhancing tools. There won't be the same number of labor hours, but the future is we work less hours. We've got to manage kind of that environment as a society. Is it the latter, or is it now we can create all these great new jobs and it's all a nice offset?
I think it'd be naive to think that everybody wins all the time. I think that in business, it's usually not the case. On the other hand, advancing forward toward a place where we don't have children sorting trash, we don't have people sitting on stools that are 18 inches apart. I think I think there is an opportunity there, as long as we're responsible about it. So you mentioned externalities in your opening. I think that's one of the things that you have to think about. Like, what if it's just, I want to make the most money I can, and therefore I'm going to replace my workers, and this, then you probably are certainly not a long-term business thinker, because that perhaps you're replacing all these human workers, degraded your customer experience of what you could have built if you had humans and robots, for example, working together. And so I think we need to see leaders that think with those externalities, not just in the negative of, well, I'm not going to dump all of my, toxic waste in the culvert here, that kind of negative externality, but also the positive misses, that I didn't think about how I might have made my customer experience so much better. Even like you mentioned, the virtual call centers, if you've solved that problem of being able to use humans when you need them, and robots and automated things and have a good experience, that's a gift to humanity, right? That's not a negative.
Makes sense. And let me ask you about your own personal story in this area. You, I believe, helped set up a data center at Google at Widows Creek, Alabama, and it was part of a broader personal story and business story. Will you tell us what you did?
I will, but I won't take credit for that data center. I must say, when I go back to Alabama, that people tend to think I had something to do with it. But anyway, it just to tell the story. So I'm originally from Alabama, and born and raised there, blue collar family, and basically my family comes from electrician background at TVA, which is Tennessee Valley Authority. And if you know anything about the history of that region, coming out of the Depression, the TVA was I think probably the biggest reason that the region was pulled out of the Great Depression, having electrified the area and also having really high quality jobs to a very abject poverty stricken area. And so my family, sort of working with TVA over multi-generations, was able to kind of pull itself out of poverty. And when before I was born, actually, my father was an electrician at the Widows Creek coal plant in Northeast Alabama. And full circle, many, many, many years later, here we are, Google putting a green data center on that same site as the coal plant has been decommissioned, and now we have a green data center there. And I was able to go back and help with the groundbreaking, and really kind of, it was a powerful thing for me, but I think it was also somewhat symbolic for the region, in that you have places like Alabama, certainly that part of Alabama, that can feel and can act very left behind. Certainly, a lot of the globalization of industries like the textile industries just decimated that area. And so you had this sort of collapse of what had been a very stable industries. And so now you have this, the internet now runs through Northeast Alabama, right? And you have this sort of connected not to the electrical grid like TVA did, but now, bridging to the green economy. And, I think Google and Alphabet's involvement in this kind of thing is more profound than just, hey, where do you put a data center? It's, where can we plug in with a community, really build together a future? And I think it's just been a tremendous success, and I very much appreciated the opportunity to be part of that.
Yeah, and Nan, you said it was symbolic. Is it also representative? I.e., we look at a lot of these technologies, call centers that get automated, et cetera. Many of the jobs, truck drivers, is in the center of the country. I remember looking at statistics that said that 6% of all of the population in Joplin, Missouri are focused on being truck drivers. The number in California was like 0.5%. So there's a disproportionate number. Is this investment that Google made in Alabama, do you feel that's representative of what can and should happen on a broad national level, or this is more of a one-off?
No, I certainly think it is. And I think it's healthy for the country and it's healthy for our economy to have that kind of engagement. And it's not just in Alabama. I mean, Google built a data center in Tennessee, and there's been data centers in Georgia, South Carolina, so in that sense, having that connection of parts of the world that can feel left behind to the modern world, to what's going forward with the internet, what's going forward with autonomous vehicles. It speaks to us solving problems together rather than some kind of, frankly, Silicon Valley arrogance about, well, we know better. Let's go, here's a new technology. Sorry, your entire industry just got decimated. Too bad, technology moves on. That kind of arrogance is so corrosive, and it also misses a huge opportunity to solve real problems. Like, well, what are the issues about moving goods across the country? How do we work on that? And how do we do that in a way that's respectful and carries forward the what are the truckers that are currently moving the goods? How do we make them more effective? How do we make them safer? That's the kind of thing I think we need to think about jointly as not just technologists, but also labor leaders and business leaders, and really kind of solve that in a macro way, not in a, I just shaved a little bit of money off my bottom line way.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you another question. We've got a whole bunch of audience questions that I'll get to. Tell us about women in tech leadership. You've been obviously a major success. What are your observations? What does it need? What needs to happen to drive more women in tech leadership roles or broad leadership?
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. Certainly starting my career at Caltech, it's been a pretty common thing that I was the only woman in the room for a lot of things. And, I think that I very much have appreciated the opportunities and the mentors and the allies that have come along the way with that. But it's certainly back in the day, it was challenging. I'm many times accused of being a techno-optimist, and in this case, I am an optimist. I've seen so much progress in so many ways in just helping, especially in the tech industry, knowing we have a problem, recognizing we have a problem, lack of diversity. How are we going about it? Trying to solve it in a bunch of experimental ways, not all of which work, some of which have unintended consequences, but yet not losing sight of the aspiration, which is we want diverse teams that can see the world from many different perspectives and be able to bring solutions where we don't have to keep going, well, wait a minute, we need one of these and three of those. And I've seen so much progress in that over the last decade or so. And I'm encouraged by that. I think to your question about what do we need to do, I think principally we have to be mindful and intentional about what is the role that we're looking to fill. And when I've seen the best progress here in terms of how you shape and build diverse teams, it's in really understanding, what am I trying to get here? Am I trying to get somebody who's sitting in a basement and just coding, or am I trying to get a collaborative team member who might have a different experience than the folks that are already here? That really being intentional about how I'm shaping a forward team is what I think helps tremendously, not to just do this kind of, well, let's clone the team we already have. Oh, shock, it's the same team we had before. It's that's not helpful, and it actually builds really brittle and not resilient teams that don't have broad perspectives. And I learned that in my startup, that we had all essentially Caltech type people, very, very technical. We were not in business people at all, didn't have a lot of respect for it, frankly. And I think that blind spot was one that limited our success and was a major reason I went to UCLA, so that I could go like, wait a minute, why is this business stuff not making sense to me? And I think that's part of what we just have to have broader viewpoints and be intentional about it, take action, experiment, and do that with a goal of really making the world the way we want it to be.
And on that topic, Nan, just before you reference UCLA, what are the obligations of academic institutions in this? And tell us about your Anderson experience as well.
So, I think academic institutions, obviously play a huge part in establishing the baseline of understanding of training and the foundations of the experience that we all need. I think the high standards that we depend on, certainly the industry depends on academia to have for, what is particularly in the PhD area, for example, what are your PhD students coming out? What do they know how to do? Do they just know how to do the next little thing in their little area? Or do they know how to think broadly about what problems are worth working on? That's one of the great things I learned in graduate school, is just to be able to think about what's worth working on. And I use that every single day. And I think that that's the kind of thing that in an academic setting, frameworks, are so powerful that you teach it at Anderson, that kind of thing, just how can I think about this, or how have others thought about similar problems is really powerful. You ask about my Anderson experience, it was foundational and pivotal. An inflection point, certainly my career and my thinking. It really broadened my ability to go from just thinking about things in a technical lens. I told people that I felt like afterward, there were frequencies of light I hadn't even seen originally that Anderson showed me. I could see things now that I didn't even know were there. Like the business aspects of how you really think about strategy, how you think about the merging of strategy with your technical capabilities. It just opened my eyes to a tremendous number of things. I think the thing I use every day for sure is the impact of visible leadership. Just that leadership is not, when I went to UCLA, I really honestly thought it was some kind of airport, book reading thing to talk about leadership and what's the big deal. But I came through that and afterward have just had and a lot of times it's leadership, and visible leadership is kind of all that matters at sometimes, certainly in crisis. Having your act together and having visible leadership that's got its act together can make all the difference. And I first was exposed to that at UCLA, so I'm eternally grateful. Excellent.
Good to hear. Great to hear. Let me start posing some of the audience questions here. So quite a few questions on what are some of the issues being tackled related to privacy and data ethics. Consumer targeted AI needs to pull data from humans, which can be exploited. How do you think about the data privacy challenge?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge topic, right? I mean, I think this is, if you look back at public data sets as to who owns what and who paid what on their property taxes, all that stuff's been public forever, but nobody could get at it, right? I mean, it was really, what are you going to do? Go to the courthouse and look up your neighbor's property taxes? But instead, now you have, instant, everybody can see everything. So you have technology having made what was public accessible. And obviously Google, with its powerful databases and search engines, has made that things very easy to find. So what are the responsibilities there? I think for me, all of this comes back to transparency of what data is for, how it's being used, and controls over it. That a consumer doesn't want to have their data about their location used, well, then turn it off. And the ability to have that really be private and the transparency around that is, I think, a powerful part of how the industry is evolving and how it needs to evolve. Because any of this, especially with the power behind all of these data sets, any of it that's not transparent, it not only could it be used nefariously, but it's also it does not engender the trust that's needed for us to move forward and able to help people. And so that, in that sense, I think transparency is critical. And, and how that, I think the companies in particular that are involved in these areas, the more transparent they are, I think the marketplace has been rewarding that with, okay, now I understand. And, in that sense, I think the control being in the hands of the consumer is really key to that.
Yep. And somewhat related to this, another questioner asked, how do we regulate the symbiotic relationship that you're looking for between people and robots? What policies are necessary?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that I'm afraid to say that, in this case, you wind up with technology running before regulation, which it often does, because, how do you regulate something that doesn't exist yet? And you often find that that the technologists understand what the rules and risks are well before you could regulate them. Now, that said, there's some fundamental things around safety, around predictability, around the what do we expect to see in the environment? It's even things like if you see photography in an open space, you need to tell people that you're that you're videoing them. And that similarly, if there are robots going to be around, you need to tell people. So that transparency and that kind of safety aspects are going to be fundamental. There's no doubt that there'll be government and other regulations as time goes on. I think the real art in all of these new technologies is regulation too soon. It stifles innovation that might have otherwise been amazing, and that's where the balance has to be. I think one of the collaboration between policymakers and technologists, and and very openly. So otherwise, I think you can create a lot of negative backlash down the road. That's again not helpful to reach the kind of helping people.
Yeah, and is that basically tied to your earlier point that you got to have responsible leadership? In the absence of responsible leadership, somebody's going to come and regulate you, and you're not going to like that outcome.
Right, and and I think there's no substitute for responsible leadership. And one of the things about just what are you trying to do? Be intentional about it. And one of the nice things about Alphabet, certainly the X part of Alphabet, extremely mission focused. And when you're mission focused and you're public about it and you align what your principles and your activities and your investments with that, you attract mission driven people that want to work on that kind of thing. You don't attract the people who are just there for short term, individual gain. You attract mission driven people. And I think having that kind of leadership and focus and being transparent with bodies like governments that have an interest, obviously, in protecting people is the right way to go, and not be trying to just push the technology just because we can, because these are the thing I learned the hard way. These are not just technical problems. I'm not even sure they're half technical problems. They're technical problems, societal problems. They're all of this kind of bigger issue that we're just part of.
Yeah, this is a fascinating kind of look over time with technology-based companies, especially in the last 10 or 20 years. It seemed like early on there was an era of kind of growth at all costs, break things, get out of my way, et cetera. And we're finding now, as technology is adopted more and has more good and bad, that people are saying you need to be more adult leaders here about technology.
I think the powerful impact of what we've learned, even things like AI, we understand, we the technology folks understand how powerful it can be, and anything that powerful has to be used for good. Otherwise, it can create a lot of backlash and a lot of damage. And I think that's really counter to what the mission is, right? The mission is to move the world forward, together. Not that we all agree on it, but that's the work, to figure out, what is the right way. And if you stand back and you look at, the last 100 years, 200 years, you look at so many of the things that technology has brought in life expectancy and just quality of life, net, we're definitely going the right way, but then it's let's make sure we're doing that responsibly for the next steps. And when some of these technologies that we're all developing are profound, certainly robots, in your everyday environment, that's never been possible. And to be able, if we can do that and do it in a way that's really beneficial, that's going to change the world.
Excellent. Another question here is asking for a little more detail about the workforce. How do we keep people in the workforce when robots are taking over jobs? This is especially concerning for low-income earners. Mm-hmm. What would be some examples, actions taken, et cetera, that you think would help, kind of mitigate the concerns?
Right. Well, let me give an example of, let's think about where a worker that was doing some job, some relatively menial job, now instead of doing that job with their own labor, is commanding a fleet of 10 robots to do their menial job. So that person, let's say they're cleaning the bathrooms, for example. So let's say that worker suddenly now has a much more of an effective output but also it's not just a like, well, I'm pushing a button and the robots go do their thing. Part of this symbiotic part is that the robots really can't do everything humans can do, and humans can't do everything robots can do. So how can we have that, like, that maybe that job of the future is that robot operator is one that's basically like, well, I'm going to show the robots how I want bathrooms to be clean. And so that benefit of the human experience is now magnified with robots doing more of the work. And you think about labor output, you think about quality of life of the human, you think about, these are all net positive. So can we structure the workforce so that we're getting more production, we're getting cleaner bathrooms or more of it, but we're also having workers do things that humans are really good at. There's a quite famous in our industry thing called Moravec's paradox, which is those things that are easy for humans are hard for computers, and vice versa. And we live that like every single day. And so if you think about the labor force and how can we merge those two? How can we bridge Moravec's paradox right there and have value created? I think that's better for both the humans and the output for the businesses that would employ them. But that's a razor's edge of structure. You think about who derives benefits from all these different business disruptions. It's very challenging, but we're certainly going at it directly to make sure we have that positive impact on the labor force.
Excellent. Another question that Paul asked, more on the lines of this disruptive innovation in relation to your work. What type of framework do you employ when ideating solutions for people before they're aware of the need, and what are the hallmarks of a viable moonshot?
Oh, that's a great question. So the way I think about, when we're working with, it's particularly some of our early partners, I often tell the team, you cannot go ask one of your early partners, hey, you can't do a conjoint analysis, for example, with them. How much would you pay for this thing? Because they're like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what that thing is. And they don't have any notion of value about it. So you don't have a comparable really to kind of go at directly, which is very challenging business modeling. But what you do have is more of a art of the possible conversation, which is well, if you could do this, what would that enable you to do? What if we could do this, then what would be the, and you can kind of open up the thinking. If you have to identify the right people for that conversation, right? And you have to that art of the possible, but you also have to go back to the people who are day to day dealing with the impact of your innovation and sort of sanity check. Is that fluffy? Is it all going to be great? How does that really play out in the real world? And not sort of bias too much on one side or the other. Because if you bias too much on the real world, you never move anything forward. On the other hand, if you bias too much on it's really going to be amazing and everybody's going to win and it's going to be great, then you're losing sight of really, what is that experience for those people that are right next to it, and trying to build that bridge. So no, that's something we work with all the time. It's really an important thing to think about, how you bridge innovation through there. Yep.
As you probably know, we had Sachin Jain speak last night, incredible healthcare kind of luminary. Question here from Jim says, what can the everyday robot do to improve our healthcare system?
I think you are going to see an increasing number of robots in the healthcare industry. I think it'd be partly because of what we said earlier, that it's a relatively understandable environment to operate in. It has huge impact to be able to work with, to use robotic labor in places where maybe human labor is not as appropriate. When COVID first hit pretty hard in California, one of my sons is in the medical field, and he volunteered to go help with nursing home stuff in the emergency response. And we were talking about just what could robots do. Unfortunately, not that I could say push a button and send him one, but just what could we do? And he was like, if the robots would just bring, like kind of water or medicine or something that the human beings didn't need to do. So the human beings could be doing that personal touch, so the robots could do things that really, do I need a human to walk in there with that medication? Not really, but I do need a human to make that connection with the patient that's suffering. So that kind of symbiosis of, let's let the robots do the things that really humans are not, they're not providing that much value. And we want the humans to provide this other value that they are uniquely qualified for. So I think you're going to see more of that.
Is there an argument on that example, Nan, where actually you start at more high value add, which is somebody that does have COVID that needs treatment, that's highly infectious, that you actually see, why can't we deal with that as opposed to bringing me just materials?
It's also what's the technology capable of right now, because it's like if in a messy world, that it's literally the work of science fiction to have a robot that can start from where it is, wherever in the building, and come over to where it needs to be, navigating through all kinds of crazy. You don't even realize how crazy your world is until you look at it through the eyes of a robot. There's some buildings that we look at that we go, wait a minute, they have curved walls. The robot's mind is blown at curved walls, and so you wind up with, human beings are just by nature and by life experience, these things are automatic to us. We generalize really well. Robots don't. And so in that sense, starting with the crazy, like, oh my God, we're just going to have a robot do all of those things. It's probably bridged too far at this point. Can we work our way up to it? Absolutely. Marrying AI and robotics together as we learn and stack tasks on top of each other. It takes us less time to learn the next task because we knew the prior one. That's what you're going to see, but we're still a long way away from where it's going to be magical like we hope it will be.
Good. Another question is on other applications that are consumer oriented in education. Watch your answer, by the way. Retail, caregiver assistance, therapies, other examples?
Yeah, I think you look at any place where there's just not a lot of human cognitive thinking going on with respect to, like, if I'm stocking a shelf, or inventory. You've seen a lot of industrial robots, or I should say commercial robots around, just, can I understand what's going on in my warehouse? Can I understand? And these are things that, is it really better for a human to go in there and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or is it better for a computer to take a robot to take a picture and, from perception and image recognition, know what it's looking at? I think you're going to see a lot of those kind of, really, did we need a human to do that? Move over to the robots. What we have to do, to the earlier conversation, is make sure that those humans are doing human things, and that ties back to the academic and the educational system. I think it could not be more critical that our education system, not just at UCLA, but all the way through K through 12, we focus on critical thinking. We focus on problem solving that humans are good at. Not hey, let's make sure this worker can move this widget from here to there. I think that was never a good strategy in concerning automation in the workforce, but it's certainly going to become less of a good strategy to just have people doing stuff that's not really requiring human intelligence. One of the things that's interesting right now is just how many humans in the world are doing data labeling, basically being able to tell the AIs and tell the robots, okay, this is what you're looking at. This is a cup. This is a bottle. This is that. So there's a lot of data labeling that's going on, and also there will be even more sort of training of robots, that humans will train robots to do things, but we want to make sure they're training the robots to be helpers, and that they're working together to achieve things.
Yep. Last question before we do a wrap up here. The question is, from a business management point of view, how much technical know-how do you need to be effective in these areas? And maybe more broadly, what advice would you give to MBAs?
So, I think the answer to the first part depends on what are you trying to, what problem are you working on? There are a lot of areas, certainly the areas that I see at X, that are extremely technical, where they look a little bit like PhD work of, you're at the boundary of what humans' knowledge is, and now you're trying to push it forward. Sometimes you're trying to push it way far forward, and trying to do that in a way that has business applications. So you really have to have a firm foundation in what it is, what's been done, and where are we, and how can we move that forward. I think do you have to be able to write code as well as the person that's writing all the code? No, you don't. And I think that wouldn't be a very strong team if everybody had the same level of capability. And on the other hand, you need to have enough to know kind of, does that make sense? Does that not make sense? And certainly on a business sense, I think the most powerful teams that I've been fortunate to be part of are those that kind of blend the technical prowess and the, how can we push that forward in a way that's kind of awesome, but yet also the business sense of, well, what's that for? Like, why is that even important? Why are we doing that? And have the innovation on the business side as well. So the advice to the MBAs, I think do what you can to understand what's happened before, which was one of my great epiphanies of which there were several at UCLA, was pretty much everything's happened before. In business, everything has happened before. It's different now in some important ways, but it's really the same as or similar to what was going on with the railroads back in the antitrust days, or what was going on with, there's all this kind of, it's happened before. So learn that, understand that, see what people tried, and think about how that applies to your new areas. But try to forge your own path where you blend things that make you unique or make your contribution unique. I think that's what I think has been my beneficial outcome, is that I have a pretty unique background that I now bring to something that I think is really life-altering and world-alteringly important.
Excellent, excellent. Nan, let me do this. I always try and summarize the takeaways I got from the session. I always like to give our speakers a chance to either upgrade it or share their own parting comments. I got quite a few things that I took away here. First of all, this idea of a moonshot in this context is very much kind of mass market. You talk about everyday people everywhere. This is not niche stuff or a 1% or a narrow enterprise application. You think about things in a very broad way. A second message out of this is some of the technical challenge and frontiers that the robots have to be learning oriented in nature to advance. There's got to be a symbiotic relationship between the worker and the robot, the human and the robot, that creates a certain amount of technical complexity. There's a set of enablers that need to happen to really allow this all to play out. And, you said, in autonomous vehicles, you have roads. In this case, we don't have that infrastructure, and you've got to be thinking about it. Otherwise, you've got kind of a theoretical view about the innovation. So you've got to think about all those pieces together. And then I have quite a few items here under leadership, which is, to me, I thought your most profound message. And what was interesting is it wasn't a shtick. It wasn't a one-term thing about leadership. And I want to list what you shared about what good leadership looks like, especially in this case. You talked about it's important leaders not have arrogance to them. That creates long-term problems with all sorts of stakeholders. They have to think about negative externalities when they're advancing innovation. They have to think about, in the case of women in leadership, you said you need to think about what you're trying to achieve, not doing kind of piecemeal things, but what is the broader ambition, and am I working towards that? They have to be visible in nature as leaders, especially during times of difficult issues. They have to be transparent. When you talked about data privacy, you talked about transparency. And you talked about the need to be a responsible leader that is mission-driven, that will in turn drive employee engagement. And then finally, an acknowledgement that technology today is getting more broadly adopted. I think Eric Schmidt has kind of spoken about that. And you better be firmly grounded that you're creating good in a broad sense, because if it's growth at all costs, get out of my way, et cetera, that will engender massive pushback and broader challenges. Those are the things that I took away. Upgrades on that, additions to that?
I don't know. I think you've got a gift at taking things and distilling it into the takeaways. I really appreciate that. No, I think you got it, and I do think the leadership part of it. If I had to go back and talk to Nan of a long time ago career chapters, what do I wish I'd understood earlier? I mean, it was to really take leadership seriously as both an art, a science, a craft, an experience-driven, purposefully important thing to be good at, and I try now with all the teams that I look after to help engender that in junior people, that understand you're part of that as a follower or as a leader of smaller teams, just making that be something that it's not like being a manager. Managers are, it's important, but being a leader is something anybody can do, and it's something everybody should be thinking about how they're doing it, because that's really where the impact comes from, is from teams, and from teams that are really dedicated to doing something, know about how they're going to do it, what are their principles, what are their values, and then they go about and execute really effectively.
Yeah, well, Nan, let me thank you and congratulate you for walking the talk on all of those items. Thank you for opening our eyes to a very cool area of technology-based innovation. Thank you for all the things that you've done for UCLA, and you make all of us proud as being an alum of the school. a big thank you, and we hope to have you back very, very soon.
Really appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity and hope the rest of the conference goes well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.